Welcome back again, everyone. This is part 3 of our Chapter 23 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. This section is entitled The Truman Presidency. The focus question for this section is, what major policy initiatives did Truman undertake? One of the first domestic issues that Truman had to face at the conclusion of World War II was this transition to a peacetime economy. And one of the first things that the administration did in order to facilitate this transition was to pass the GI Bill, which helped thousands of World War II veterans attend college, and it also provided low-cost loans for things like mortgages and other economic incentives to try to put these veterans on a firm economic footing and give them the education they needed to become productive citizens. Overall, Truman's various policy initiatives were placed under an umbrella that he called the Fair Deal, which looked to improve the social safety net and raise the American standard of living. And this included raising the minimum wage, instituting a national health insurance program, expanding public housing programs, expanding Social Security aid, and expanding educational aid, particularly for college level education. The aftermath of World War II did see a brief spike in Union activity around the country, and this was spurred by the fact that the situation for workers after the war had drastically changed. Many workers, in many ways, had it made during the war. They were working long hours, but they were making very good money. However, at the conclusion of the war, and with the de-escalation of the military spending towards the war, this eliminated much of the overtime work for war production that many workers had relied on for their incomes. And also this, coupled with rising inflation, led to a drop in workers' real income. And this sparked the largest strike wave in American history. And a great example of this was the strike in the steel industry, where 750,000 steel workers went on strike for better wages and better treatment. Strikes even shut down some Hollywood studios. They had expanded into so many industries by that point. And in reaction to this strike surge after the war, the Truman administration became hostile towards unions, and court injunctions forced some striking workers back to work. Much like the aftermath of World War I, which saw a pushback against socialism and communist influence and a resurgence of conservatism and conservative values. At the conclusion of World War II, a very similar phenomenon took place, and Republicans swept to control of both houses of Congress in 1946 on a wave of anti-labor sentiment and concerns over communism and socialism. The failure of Operation Dixie, which was an attempt by the AFL and CIO unions to break the back of anti-union sentiment in the South, aligned conservative Southern Democrats with Republicans at this time. And Republicans in general turned aside Truman's Fair Deal plans, which they equated with socialism. And Republicans helped to pass the Taft-Hartley Act, which outlawed the closed shop, which was, businesses that made union membership mandatory for employment, and authorized right-to-work laws, which meant that employers could hire and fire anybody, regardless of union membership, at will for any reason. This led to a general decline in union membership and union influence in general in the country. The aftermath of World War II saw the true genesis of the civil rights movement in the United States, and President Truman reached out to the black community in unprecedented ways. And a broad civil rights coalition involving labor, religious groups, and black organizations supported local and state laws outlawing discrimination. And another indication that race relations were in flux was the signing of Jackie Robinson and the inclusion of black players in Major League Baseball, a major development, as baseball was the first sport to attempt to integrate its ranks. In 1947, Truman established the Commission on Civil Rights, which issued a report called To Secure These Rights. And this report called on the federal government to assume responsibility for racial equality. However, this civil rights program was rejected by a conservative Republican Congress. However, Truman pushed back against that and issued an executive order to desegregate the armed forces. And Democrats also added a strong civil rights plank to their platform in the election of 1948. The inclusion of this civil rights plank in the Democratic Party platform in 1948 led to a rift within the Democratic Party itself. If you recall, the Democrats had long been the party of Jim Crow and segregation, and many conservative Democrats saw the adoption of civil rights issues as a violation of their core principles. And this led to the formation of a sort of alternative Democratic Party called the Dixiecrats. These were Southern conservative Democrats who rejected that civil rights plank of their party's platform, and they formed the States' Rights Democratic Party. The nickname for them were the Dixiecrats, and nominated Strom Thurmond for president in 1948. Another party was also formed, the Progressive Party, which was formed by left-wing critics of Harry Truman who thought that his Fair Deal policies did not go far enough, and they nominated Henry A. Wallace for president in 1948. The Progressive Party called for international control of nuclear weapons and a working economic relationship with the USSR. The 1948 campaign was a very interesting one, with 4 candidates from 4 separate political parties. It seemed from the outset to be more or less anyone's game, and Truman's position especially was threatened by the existence of the States' Rights Party, which siphoned off many Democratic votes from Truman. And the Republicans, for their part, nominated a man named Thomas A. Dewey. And he seemed to be the front runner for most of the campaign. And in fact, the media predicted a Dewey victory. You may recall the first image at the very beginning of this section of this lecture that showed Truman holding up a newspaper that says Dewey defeats Truman. Many news medias on the eve of the election had already printed up hundreds of thousands of copies announcing Dewey's inevitable win. Of course, when dawn came about and the election votes were totaled, Truman actually came out on top, and Truman reveled in, kind of throwing his victory in the faces of the Republicans by holding up that newspaper at his campaign rally at the conclusion of the election. And truly, Truman's success was one of the greatest upsets in American political history, and pretty much surprised everyone, including Truman. And that concludes part 3 of our Chapter 23 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.